Morning, everyone. My name is Amy Jordan Wilkes, and I'm joined by my partner, Carlton Hilson. We are both partners in the Labor and Employment Group of Burr and Foreman in the Birmingham office. And this is just going to be a quick update on some tax proposals and things you may have heard about over the presidential campaign and in the last few weeks about getting rid of taxes on overtime and to a lesser extent tips. We're not going to talk about that much, but I'll just go ahead. Spoiler alert for anyone joining. This is not actually a federal law yet. This is just a proposal that's been talked about. But let's jump in and get my screen to work. All right, so campaign promises. So back during the election, you probably, if you paid attention, heard Donald Trump talk about, particularly when he was in Nevada, service workers and how he was going to eliminate taxes on tips. And he said that first in June of 2024, and then later in September, he also threw out a proposal for no tax on overtime. As you would imagine, Kamala Harris followed suit, and she said the same thing while campaigning in Nevada, that they were going to eliminate taxes on tips. And you might have been asking yourself, why so much emphasis on this? I mean, obviously they were in Nevada where there's a huge service industry, and they, wanted to get those votes. But really, what's interesting, only 2.5% of Americans work in an industry where they are tipped. So it's a very small percentage of the workforce.
And Amy, I'd point out too that I do think these were obviously campaign comments and meant to attempt to garner votes. But Trump did narrowly edge out Vice President Harris in Nevada, and who knows if these proposals on no tax on tips made the difference for Trump in the state. But I find it very interesting looking back on all this that Vice President Harris pretty quickly followed Trump's comments with the same type of proposals. So to me, it's almost a bipartisan issue if there is one, in America today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mentioned that the 2.5% of the workforce is tipped, and that's a small percentage, and a lot of those don't even make enough money to pay federal income tax. What's interesting, the flip side of that is for the overtime portion, 56% of the workforce is hourly and therefore would be eligible for overtime. And of the salaried workers, another 15% of salary workers are also eligible for overtime. So that is a much bigger percentage of the population who would be affected by laws like this if they were to pass.
Yeah, and I would also point out that, and it says it on the slide there, that Vice President Harris and the White House did not address the no tax on overtime issue. They just really declined to comment in response to President Trump's proposals. And I don't know specifically why they did that. I'm sure, we could, maybe somebody could ask them those questions. But while the Vice President Harris made the no tax on tips comment, she did not specifically address the no tax on overtime.
Yeah, and I think that's probably because that's such a bigger hit to the tax revenue that the country gets. I would add.
Right. Yeah, they just didn't really address it one way or the other.
All right, so where are we now?
All right, so let's talk about the current status of the no tax on tips and no tax on overtime proposals. Amy, did you go to the next slide? Oh, there we go. Okay, first, as Amy has mentioned, neither proposal has passed yet, and neither proposal is current law. However, President Trump has continued to publicly comment that ending the federal income taxes on tips and overtime is a priority for his administration. And I'll take you back 2 weeks ago when President Trump did the joint address to Congress. This is a quote from President Trump during that speech. He said, "To get urgently needed relief to Americans hit especially hard by inflation, I'm calling for no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, and no tax on Social Security benefits to seniors. That's a direct quote from President Trump earlier this month. So to me, that signals that these were not just, empty campaign promises, and that the Trump administration, means business when it comes to this stuff. But Trump cannot make tax cuts by himself. He needs Congress to act and pass the legislation that would create this tax relief. And we start with, you see here on the slide, on February 25th, the House passed the budget by a very narrow margin of 217 votes to 215 votes. In that budget, there was a $4.5 trillion tax break proposal. Now, as I understand it, the budget that was passed did not specifically mention no tax on tips or no tax on overtime, but many commentators have suggested that certainly that's what's going to fill the gap. And if you see below, the No Tax on Tips Act was introduced in both the House and the Senate in January. That No Tax on Tips Act is sitting in committee right now. And I'll also point out to you that it is co-sponsored by Republicans. I think Senator Ted Cruz is one of the sponsors, and then Nevada Democrats are also sponsoring it. And as Amy mentioned, Nevada, of course, they would want to sponsor this because they have a very heavy service industry, especially in Las Vegas.
Yeah. And I'll say on the budget resolution, that's just passed the House very narrowly. It would have to get through the Senate, and then of course they'd have to go through a reconciliation process. So, I think we all know that the House and Senate don't always see eye to eye on things. So, who knows where that ends up? And obviously, if there's a government shutdown, that's going to further delay this and kind of throw a wrench in the process.
Yeah, we don't know. You can go to the next slide, Amy. We don't know where any of this stuff is going, but we think, these could be passed quickly or it could take some time. But the fact that these are bills sponsored by both Republicans and Democrats, and President Trump continues to make comments about it, suggests to us that something potentially could happen quickly. And as you see here, there are actually two separate bills aimed at eliminating federal income taxes on overtime pay that have been introduced in Congress. Both of them also are sitting in committee right now. So stay tuned on that. It's the Keep Every Extra Penny Act, or the KEEP Act, and the Overtime Pay Tax Relief Act. Both of those are sitting in committee, and we will have to wait to see what comes out of those committees.
Yeah, and one question that's come up, if any of the budget resolution passes or any of these proposed bills actually were to become law, when they might go into effect, and there's been some debate on that. Some people, speculate that if they could get them passed, here in the next month or so, that they would try to get them to be effective July 1 to go on kind of a fiscal year basis. But then a lot of other people think it would be January 1, 2026 to line up with the tax year.
Yeah, given the way Congress and our federal government tends to work, I would speculate it'll be in 2026. But I agree with you, Amy. I've seen lots of people comment that they could ram one of these through and it could become law pretty quickly.
Yep.
All right, we've also seen a number of similar proposals in certain states. Alabama is actually the only state that currently exempts overtime wages from state income tax. Alabama's law actually went into effect in January 2024, so it's been in effect for over a year, but it's set to expire this June 2025. And we'll have to wait to see if Alabama extends the overtime pay exemption from state income taxes. We don't know yet, one way or another, but I would say I expect Alabama to seriously consider extending the state level exemption, because it's a measure that is supported by President Trump at the federal level, and Alabama is obviously a Republican, or considered a Republican state. So I would think that Alabama would look to extend that, but we don't have any news on it yet.
Yeah, I mean, it was originally passed back in 2023.
Yeah.
It was designed to combat, high inflation and kind of carry over financial losses from COVID. That was I think the basis for it at the time, or what they said. But now I think it'd be easier for them to say, this has been so great. for
Yeah.
everyone in our state. We're going to continue it.
Right.
But what's interesting is in just 2025, which is only a few months old, 19 states have introduced similar proposals. Now, none of those have passed yet, but still, I think it, goes to show that this obviously is something that, I mean, if we're being, a little cynical, resonated with voters, and something that lawmakers, are putting forward to kind of help with their constituents and put them in a good position, going forward in future elections.
Yeah, I mean, we've had yeah, you're right. 19 other states have introduced these proposals. I think we're going to start seeing some of these no tax on tips and no tax on overtime passed at the state level pretty, in the next couple of months, they're going to start getting passed for sure. And keep in mind also, a state like Florida that's in our southeast area, it doesn't have a state income tax, so you won't see any proposals on overtime at least, or tips coming out of the state of Florida and several other states as well.
See, yeah, some others. All right, so obviously, I think the concern for employers is potential for manipulation, and there are some others that we'll talk about. But here's just a scenario that we have for someone who is currently exempt. And you can look, what their take-home pay is based on current tax rates, and what would happen if you switch that employee to a non-exempt employee. So you can see that their take-home pay, assuming, again, I'm not gonna try to do math for you on air here in the morning, but you can see that even if take-home, even if you reduced the salary of an exempt employee, if you converted them to hourly, removing the tax on overtime, you could keep their take-home pay the same, but actually pay them less. And we think that's something that potentially could cause some issues, particularly with employees. Now, in this example, this is a high wage earner. But if you had someone who was salaried, who was just very close to the salary cutoff for overtime, I think we could see situations where those people, are asking to be made hourly.
Yeah. If the no tax on overtime bill gets passed, like I think we do expect at some point, I think there will certainly be an incentive to reclassify, ordinary income for overtime to to hourly pay, so more people receive overtime and don't have to pay taxes on it. And I think employers and employees are going to get very creative and use either of these laws in a manner that helps employers to retract and retain employees, and employees to pay less income taxes, which everybody wants to do.
Yeah, I mean, it's two-sided. I think it could help you retain hourly workers. It's a benefit to them. I think to the extent if any employer thought, well, hey, this is great, we can actually pay you a smaller salary, but you make the same money, I think that would be something that we would not advise. Usually salaries going down is not good for recruiting and retention.
Yeah. I mean, I think, previously untipped jobs that traditionally do not earn tips, we will see more of those jobs start, asking for tips or classifying income as tips, however they want to do that, to try to help their employees pay less income tax. That might mean that when we check out, even more so than we do right now, we're asked to put a tip on the top of our bill, but there will be an incentive for businesses to do that, so that their employees don't have to pay as much federal income and state income taxes as well on their income.
And obviously, you'd have to watch out for employees, kind of overworking overtime, inaccurately reporting hours, things like that.
Yep. All right, so here's a very similar scenario, and I'll call this kind of an extreme example. But in this example, just consider we've got a CEO at some mega international corporation that makes $10 million annually in salary and works an average of 50 hours per work week. If overtime, if overtime is eliminated from federal income taxes, there will be an incentive for the company and the CEO to switch his compensation from salary to hourly plus overtime. So if you see here in orange, the CEO in this example, if he was switched from a $10 million salary to a $3,500 per hour pay rate, he would get 40 hours per week paid at that $3,500. And the remaining 10 hours per week would be paid at $5,250 for his overtime pay. At the end of the day, the mega corporation would still pay the CEO $10 million in annual compensation. It just wouldn't be in salary anymore. Now it would be hourly plus overtime. But for that high-paid CEO, he would be receiving $2.7 million of tax-free overtime pay. Again, this is an extreme example, and we don't know exactly whether Congress will put, income limitations or caps on these bills if they are indeed passed. But this is where we think there could be potential for manipulation and potential for employers and employees, even up to the executive level, to get creative and try to limit their tax bills at the end of the day.
Yeah, again, I agree. Extreme example, unlikely to happen, but people learn how to work the system to benefit.
Yeah, people don't like paying taxes, so they're going to do what they have to do.
Right. Well, and one thing to keep in mind that Carlton and I talked about this morning, what's hard about switching people back and forth between hourly and salaried, so let's say these laws were to pass, we have no idea how long they would be in effect. There could, obviously be an administration change, and, we could flip back. So, you risk maybe a little bit of a seesaw effect, going back and forth.
Yeah. We also don't know how, the word overtime might be defined by Congress, but, the Federal Fair Labor Standards Act defines overtime as any time worked over 40 hours in a single work week. But, we work with lots of businesses and lots of clients that voluntarily pay overtime wages and overtime compensation to employees at different intervals. For example, whenever an employee works more than 8 hours in a single day, even if that employee does not actually work over 40 hours in the work week, or for time worked on holidays or Sundays. So how the word overtime is actually defined by the federal bill, if it's passed, will be very important to determine, what actually is exempt from federal income taxes. And we can see that, creating kind of a payroll nightmare for a lot of companies that pay overtime at different intervals. So that we'll have to stay tuned on that as well.
Well, and that was actually an issue in Alabama with their law. They did not define what overtime meant in the original law, and they actually had to amend it back, that took effect in October of last year, to match the federal FLSA definition of overtime, because there was confusion about what it meant and what was included. Yeah. Just there's so many things that are excluded from the regular rate under federal law. Premium pay, some of this holiday and weekend pay. That's something that's really going to have to be sorted through. So, I think the last thing that I wanted to say is, kind of what's next. This obviously isn't the federal law yet. So, what should you be doing now to prepare for if this were to go into effect? And, one of the big things that I can think of is just, evaluate your workforce. And this is probably something a lot of you did in preparation for the salary basis exemptions that went into effect and then didn't. But looking at your workforce, like your breakdown of salaried versus hourly, how much overtime are people working, how much are they getting, just, all those kind of factors like that. I think those are always good things to kind of have a handle on, but particularly now if we're looking at these changes.
All right, so we have time for a couple questions, and it looks like we have received a couple that Amy and I will be glad to answer. If anybody else has a question, please shoot it to us now, or feel free to send me or Amy an email or call us after we jump off the Zoom. We'll be glad to answer any questions about this. And of course, Burr Foreman, our labor and employment team, will be monitoring all of this moving forward. And should any of this get passed, as we certainly think it could, we will probably have another one of these Burr morning shows and lots of updates on it and lots of guidance to provide everybody. But our first question from someone in the audience is, how would this impact salary associates that are eligible for overtime? And Amy, you can answer this too, but my thought would be that the salaried associates who are eligible for overtime would no longer have to pay federal income taxes on their overtime compensation. And I think that's, the change that Alabama made. When Alabama initially passed its no tax on overtime law at the state level for state income taxes way back in 2023, they defined overtime as pay received by hourly workers. But we know, and as your question implies, we can have salaried associates who are eligible for overtime and are classified as non-exempt, that receive overtime too. So Alabama has actually made that correction. They did that last fall. And so, yeah, again, the salaried associates who make overtime would not be paying federal income taxes on that overtime pay.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, FLSA, non-exempt is non-exempt, whether you're hourly or salaried. I think, in the workforce, that's a common misconception that if you're salaried, that automatically means that you don't get overtime. So the next question I see kind of rolls into that, and it says, we're focusing on the tax piece, but how would this impact the classification test, salary thresholds, and duties test? The answer is it would not. This has nothing to do with who's classified as exempt under the white collar exemptions. There was, obviously everyone knows there were increases to the salary threshold, not the duties part of those exemptions, that partially went into effect last year in July, but those have been pulled back by the courts.
Yep.
And we're back to the old salary threshold. And again, no change to the duties test. And these laws in Congress have nothing to do with the actual who qualifies for an exemption for overtime.
Agreed. All right. Well, I think that's all that Amy and I have. Again, if anyone else has questions or wants to talk to us, you can feel free to shoot us an email or call us. I think both of us will be in the office all day and we'll be glad to talk with anyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.